The smallest details can have a massive impact on your retirement. This is basically the whole idea of our motto: you don't need more money, you need a better plan. For instance, when retirees are putting together a Roth conversion plan, the process typically goes something like this. You first identify that you have a tax problem. Maybe you have large enough tax-deferred balances that the amount of income you will be forced to take down the road will push you into various tax hurdles. Okay, great. Now as step 2, you need to analyze and calculate out the best way to fix this tax problem. Should you convert heavily for a few years, or should you perform smaller conversions for a longer period of time? Now this, step number 2, is where most people stop. But by stopping here, you leave behind a significant amount of the value that can come from the small details. And the small details are what we're going to discuss today in determining the time of the year you should perform your Roth conversion. And as you'll see in this video, the right timing can improve your Roth conversion strategy by as much as 30%. Now, this series is going to be broken into 2 parts. The first part, I'm going to overview the timing strategies and show you the historical results. In part number 2, it'll be a lot more data heavy, and we'll be talking about how you want to fine-tune these strategies in your particular situation. Now, ultimately, there are going to be 5 different Roth conversion strategies that we discuss in today's video. The timestamps will be in the description below if you're wanting to jump around. The first strategy is the most common, and this is an end-of-the-year conversion. Now, let's say you want to perform a $100,000 conversion here in 2023. Well, with this strategy, you would wait until the very last part of the year. Now, there are some valid benefits with waiting until the end of the year. The main one being that you will have the full picture for what your tax landscape looks like in that given year. You know all of the income, dividend, and capital gains that will be taxable throughout the year. And you also have the most data for certain tax hurdles like IRMA, for what IRMA will look like 2 years from now. But by far, the biggest drawback of this strategy is you miss out on a lot of investment growth throughout the year. For instance, let's say investment markets are up 8 out of 10 years. By converting at year end, you are basically missing out on all of this growth in 8 out of those 10 years. That growth is happening in your tax deferred accounts before you convert. And so you're constantly playing catch up rather than having that growth happen within your tax-free account. Now, this is by far the most common Roth conversion strategy. Most of the time when I'm talking to retirees and they've performed conversions in the past, they've almost always done so at the end of the year. But as you'll see when we get into the results section, this common strategy is also commonly the worst strategy you can take for your Roth conversion plan. The second timing strategy basically flips all of this on its head. So rather than performing an end-of-year conversion, you're performing a start-of-year conversion. And basically all of the benefits and drawbacks also flip with this strategy. The benefit here is you're able to take advantage of any investment growth throughout the year, but the disadvantage here is you can convert too much if you have some other surprise income. Now, in practice, many retirees can get around the negatives of this strategy by just starting out and performing a start-of-year conversion with about a 90 to 95% conversion of the goal target. So if you are going to convert $100,000 throughout the year, you would start with a $90,000 to $95,000 conversion to give yourself a little wiggle room for any surprise income. Now, we've discussed Roth conversion timing on this channel before, and in the past, some have commented saying that a start-of-year conversion versus an end-of-year conversion is basically the same thing outside of the first year. But if you're thinking this, understand you're making a costly mental error. Let's say we're going to perform $100,000 conversions for 4 years. Now I have some hypothetical performance on the screen that you can see. Note that year 1 is a negative year for performance. Now, if you were going to perform an end-of-year conversion, you would expect the strategy to do well based on the timeline I show you here. For instance, the first year is a negative year, and so a starting year conversion, if all that was different was that first year, you'd expect the starting year conversion to end up with a worse result. Now, an end of year conversion skips out on that first losing year, and you can follow the subsequent years, and you'll see that basically at the end of this conversion period, you would end up with about $466,000 in total conversions plus growth. Now let's go ahead and flip this strategy to a start of the year conversion. Now, if you believe the original objection that I discussed, you would think that at the end of this 4-year time period, you should have less than $466,000. But this isn't the case. And the reason for this is you're not just shifting that first conversion by 12 months, you're shifting every subsequent conversion by 12 months as well. Notice here that you end the first year in the worst spot. $95,000 versus $100,000. But then as soon as the second year begins, you convert again and you have $195,000 that will be growing by 10% throughout the next year. By the second year, you have more than you would have had if you would have started with the end of year conversions. And by the time the 4 years is done, you have about $30,000 more, which is all coming from the growth of performance between these two strategies. And so know that you're converting the same amount in each given year, but the results are vastly different. Next, we'll cover strategies 3 and 4 relatively quickly because they're really just small variations from the first two strategies. The third is a diversified choice that we'll call the split method. Rather than choosing a start of the year or end of year conversion, you do half and half. And so you're diversifying between a start and end of year conversion strategy. In my opinion, this should be the default for most retirees, and I'll show why in the results section. The fourth strategy is simple and tries to avoid timing altogether. So rather than picking a start of the year or end of year conversion, you're simply going to convert the same amount each and every month. This is an equal conversion, as we'll name it. If you're trying to convert $100,000 throughout the year, you'd split this up and convert about $8,333 each and every month. Finally, we'll discuss our preferred method here at Safeguard, and I'll name this the drawdown method for the sake of results to come. Now, how this works is you basically begin at the start of the year with half of the conversion for the year. Now, if the market hits a given drawdown point, let's say this trigger is down 20% from market highs, you would layer on the second conversion. If there's no drawdown that's hit throughout the year, you would wait until the end of the year and then you'd layer on that second part of that conversion. And so if there's no drawdown trigger hit, it basically turns into the split strategy. Now, my team and I like this strategy because it's diversified. You defend against early year conversion mistakes because you're only performing half of the conversion at the start of the year, but you're also able to take advantage of market declines when they arise. But there are a few things worth noting here. The first is that this can be a little bit more difficult to employ psychologically. You have to be long-term focused. You might convert when the market is down 20%, and the market may fall further. Now, in practice, this is all right as long as you have time to wait for the recovery. Second, the strategy does require a bit more attention to the market because you do need to be ready for when that trigger is hit. Let's look at an example of this strategy in practice during the COVID decline of 2020. Now, we know that in March, the market fell as much as 35% from its highs, but had fully recovered and was even at an all-time high by December. Now, let's say we had a 20% drawdown trigger. You would have started the year with half of your $100,000 conversion, which means firing off a $50,000 conversion here in January. Then in early March, you would have hit the drawdown trigger during the decline of COVID. You would have at this point layered on your second $50,000 conversion, and just note how crummy you would have felt just a few days after that second conversion. You would have had a total of $100,000 worth of conversions that would now be right around about $75,000 in value. This didn't take long, however, to turn around, and by year's end, your conversions would have ended up above $130,000, significantly better than if you would have just performed an end-of-year conversion. Now, understand that different parameters, such as the drawdown trigger, will deliver different results, at least historically. We'll discuss this more in part 2 of this video series. Also understand that although the market recovery happened in the same year, it doesn't need to happen immediately. If in year 3 we saw the recovery finally happen, we would still benefit from converting at a discount, at a decline. Now let's go ahead and bring this all together. To test the strategies, we're going to use the stock market, and we're going to use data going back to 1927. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to look at 2 rolling conversion time spans, both 8 years as well as 5 years. We're then going to look at all of these rolling windows, and we're going to average the results to try to find which Roth conversion timing strategy is best for your situation, at least historically speaking. Then in part 2, I'll dive deeper into changing up certain variables and smaller details regarding each of these timing strategies. Now, we'll first start by showing the 8-year Roth conversion timeline. Now, the graph on the screen is only showing the growth from the conversion. And so, for instance, if we were performing a $100,000 conversion for 8 years, we would have a cost basis with those conversions of $800,000. We are separating out that $800,000 and only showing the growth here because the cost basis would be the same in every given scenario. Now, note here that the worst strategy by a wide margin ends up being the most common strategy. Now, I'm going to say that again. The worst strategy by a wide margin ends up being the most common strategy. The strategy ends up about 18% worse than the best strategy shown here. The best strategy, on the other hand, ends up being the drawdown strategy. Now, in this specific example, I'm showing a 10% drawdown trigger. Now, out of everything that we show here, the middle three strategies are all pretty close and a lot less complex than the fifth strategy. Now, I think a DIY investor could leave behind the complexity in strategy number 5 and use any of these 3 middle strategies and find satisfactory results. It's really just the end of year most common strategy that ends up having materially worse results. Now, the reason I broke this into a 2-part series is I want to show that by changing certain variables, it can adjust the outcome. I want to make sure you're not making decisions for your retirement just based off cherry-picked results. An example of this would be shrinking that Roth conversion timeline from 8 years down to 5 years. Now, here's what the results look like if we make that change. Here you will see that the drawdown strategy still wins, but it's much closer to the start of the year strategy. Now, there are some important reasons why this is the case, and we'll cover that in the second part of this series. The one takeaway here, however, the big consistency, at least in historical analysis, regardless of changing the variables, is that the end of year conversion strategy consistently loses. Now, it may not be here yet, but within a week from recording this video, you should see part 2 shown right up here. If you're wanting to learn more about getting the most out of your Roth conversion timing strategy, click this video right here. Always remember, you don't need more money, you need a better plan. Thanks for watching.